Hey there, my name is Megan and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be recommending 5 Flintlock fantasy series. But before we go ahead and get on into the books, if you are not already subscribed to my channel, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button as well as the little bell icon so you can be notified every time I post new bookish content. I post new videos every Monday, Thursday, and Saturday, and sometimes other days throughout the week. Also, don't forget to check down in the description box below for links to all of my social media, my Buddy Read Discord, and my Patreon, where you can be entered into winning book giveaways. So what is Flintlock fantasy? For those of you who have never heard that term before, basically it is a subgenre of fantasy that involves gunpowder. So if you think about more traditional fantasy stories, they usually take place in a medieval type fantasy setting with weapons such as swords and spears and bows and arrows. But in Flintlock fantasy, we have a fantasy setting that uses guns or cannons or any other type of weaponry that involves gunpowder. A lot of these books draw information from the 18th and 19th centuries and some of the world history events going on during that time period. So for these 5 fantasy series, 4 out of the 5 I have read, and one of them I know is Flintlock fantasy and has been on my radar for the longest time, so I just wanted to also include it in this list. The first book is The Thousand Names by Django Wexler. This is book 1 in the Shadow Campaigns. This is a 5-book fantasy series. And I have read only this book, even though I own books 1 through 4. And I do want to revisit this series because I read this book so long ago and just never continued with the series, but I do definitely want to, and I'll definitely be rereading The Thousand Names before continuing just because it's been so long since I've read it. But this series is reminiscent of the Napoleonic Wars, and it takes place in a desert setting of all things. We follow 2 different characters. The first one is Captain Marcus, and Captain Marcus was in charge of this colonial garrison. He was kind of like in charge of this sleepy, kind of easy type post, and a rebellion ended up forcing him to be commander of this very disenfranchised section of the army that's clinging to this outpost in the middle of the desert. Then we follow Winter, who's trying to flee her past, so she masquerades as a male, enlists in the army, and ends up getting promoted to commander herself. Then we have the arrival of Colonel Janice, and Colonel Janice is leading this battalion on this battle campaign, but there's definitely more to him than that, and he is dabbling in the supernatural aspect of this book, and Winter and Marcus's fates kind of cling to what Colonel Janice decides to do. And I know that's an incredibly vague synopsis, but this is a Flintlock fantasy because the first whole book basically focuses on this single campaign, and it is very heavy in battle tactics, formations, military procedures, and processes. We're literally following 2 leaders of this army. And the second half of the book is where we dig way more into the plot, into the supernatural and fantasy aspects of this story. The battle scenes in this are very, very intricate and long-winded. Like I said, the first half is very battle-heavy. And in my personal opinion, this is definitely a low magic book because I feel like the book focuses way more on the military aspect than it does the magic. So if any of you guys watched my low magic fantasy book recs, this would definitely be part of that category. Then we have the Powder Mage trilogy by Brian McKellen. I do have a full review for this trilogy. If you guys are interested in checking it out, I will link that up in the cards. But this series is Flintlock fantasy because the magic system, the main magic system, literally revolves around gunpowder. So powder mages are able to ingest gunpowder and get these enhanced magical abilities because of it. In this book, we use 18th century weaponry, and that is a big part in the military part of the plot. This book is different than The Thousand Names because in my personal opinion, it is way more fantasy heavy. So we do have these battle scenes that involve guns and other weaponry, but then we also have these battle scenes that strictly involves magic. In this series, we're following Field Marshal Thomas, the main character here, who is a military leader, and at the beginning of the book, he orchestrates a coup to overthrow the corrupt monarchy government. He is a powder mage as well as his son, Daniel Two-Shot, who is part of the military, but he's more of like a rogue character who kind of does whatever he wants and goes on special missions for things. But Field Marshal Thomas and other characters are attempting to stop a civil war within the Nine Nations, the world in this book, as well as deal with some supernatural elements such as gods returning to Earth. There are several scenes in these books that follow Field Marshal Thomas as he is literally leading troops into battle and a lot of fighting scenes, but I feel like it's well balanced with the magical aspect to this book and world. And then we also follow a private investigator named Adamant. So whereas The Thousand Names was way more, I think, military focused and the plot didn't deviate that much from this, I feel like the Powder Mage trilogy does, and it balances a lot of different things in the world. Then we have the Mistborn Era 2 novels by Brandon Sanderson, and this is definitely a Flintlock fantasy book. In my opinion, it has very Western type feels to it with a little bit of steampunk elements. So it's definitely a very unique type story, but it incorporates the magic system and the events from the first 3 books in the series. In this book, we are following Scadrial, and it has been 300 years since the original Mistborn events, and technology obviously has been evolving, so now we have electricity and railroads and guns and other type of weapons that weren't there in the first trilogy. We follow a main character named Waxillium, who was a deputy in like the Wild West, and he's actually noble-born, and he has to return to Elendel, the capital, in order to take care of business with his family house. He is literally like the head of his family's house. He's the only surviving, I guess, heir to his family's fortune and name. So he returns home and ends up getting involved in all of these ongoings in the city of Elendel that have to do with the magic system of this world. The way that the magic system works in this world is that we have allomancy, where characters are able to adjust and metabolize metal in order to get magical abilities, and the different metals do different things. And then we have Fyrkami, and Fyrkami is very similar to allomancy, but instead of ingesting the metals, characters are able to use the metals to store their abilities and draw on them at later times. And they use these things called metal mines to do that. So a Fyrkamist would be able to store his or her speed over time and then draw from the metal mine in order to get an exorbitant amount of speed. And then this book revolves a lot around Twinborns, and Twinborns have the capacity for both types of magics, allomancy and Fyrkami. So this is definitely a Flintlock fantasy because, like I said, we have Wax, who was a deputy in the West, and he has like an old faithful gun that he always draws from. There are literal gunfights in this series. Like in this book, there is a gunfight at a wedding that is just crazy, and it's so much fun to read. And then we have, in the last book I read, The Bands of Mourning, we have a entire train fight. So I was like, this is literally a Western where they are fighting on this train. They're attempting to be attacked and robbed. And then there is a gunfight on the train, as well as incorporating like the magical elements. So this series is so much fun because you have those traditional like Wild West elements, and then combined with Fyrkami and allomancy. It's wild. It's so much fun. And then we have the Waking Fire, or the Draconis Memoria series by Anthony Ryan. This is definitely a Flintlock fantasy, but I like this book because, very similar to the Powder Mage trilogy, it incorporates a lot of magic and other types of elements into the book other than just like fighting with guns and things like that. But in this series, we are following the Iron Ship, a trading syndicate who basically made its living off of killing dragons and taking their blood, because their blood, if ingested by Bloodblessed, can give people certain abilities. And because these dragons are so rare and Bloodblessed can only get their abilities by ingesting blood, it has made the Iron Ship Trading Syndicate extremely wealthy and extremely powerful. But they've been facing a problem. The population of dragons has slowly been decreasing. There are different types of colors of dragons, and one of these dragons is known as the White Dragon, and its blood has been rumored to have these really powerful abilities, although it's never really been confirmed. So the Iron Ship Trading Syndicate, as well as some other characters in the book, make it their mission to find this White Dragon and kill it and extract its blood. The reason I like this book so much is not only do we have a lot of politics going on in this book because we have the syndicate, and then we have a neighboring empire that is going to try and capitalize on the failings of the syndicate. And then we also have a lot of adventure going on. So we have some of the characters that go off searching for this white dragon, and they have to go to these like old abandoned ruined cities. And then we have the actual war. There is battles and war that some of our characters are involved in. And that is where a lot of the Flintlock fantasy elements come in. And so this is a book that is very well balanced with regards to politics, adventure, action, magic, and Flintlock fantasy. And lastly, we have His Majesty's Dragon by Naomi Novik. This is book 1 in the Temeraire series, and I think there's 9 books in this series, which is a lot. But this is a retelling of the Napoleonic Wars, and I have not read this series, but I do like Naomi Novik, and it's been on my mental TBR list for a long time. And like I said, it's a retelling of the Napoleonic Wars, which obviously was in the 1800s, which obviously would include a lot of Flintlock fantasy elements. And the difference in this series is that it incorporates the use of dragons. So in this book, there is a French frigate that gets captured for its precious cargo, which is an unhatched dragon egg. And these dragons that are used in fighting are obviously bred and hatched for size and speed. So there is something special about this unhatched dragon. The captain of this ship, Will Lawrence, ends up developing a relationship with this dragon, and he is thrust into the world of aerial corps and becomes the master of the Temeraire dragons. He has no knowledge of airborne battle before, and he's responsible for fighting against the French's own aerial corps of dragon riders. All right, you guys, that is it for 5 Flintlock fantasy series recommendations. Let me know in the comments if you've read any of these and what you thought of them, or if I should delve into the Temeraire series or not. And I will see y'all in another video soon. Goodbye.